In our fast-paced world, burnout can be a common experience. Especially when you're a professional, the relentless demands of modern life can take a toll on your well-being. What exactly is burnout and how can it impact your well-being? That's what we are here to discuss on today's episode of Good Sense by Insurance with Iranjali Unamboowe Abeyratne, the founder of Edhati Consultancy. So welcome to the show, Iranjali.
Thank you for having me.
So Iranjali, we frequently hear the word burnout. So what does it exactly mean and how does it impact professionals and their well-being?
Good question. So I think to answer your question about burnout, it's important for us to look at what well-being really is. So well-being from a biopsychosocial perspective means that one is physically, socially and mentally well. So this means that they are able to interact effectively and efficiently with their colleagues at work, the relationships at home and at work, and also when it comes to their mental health, they're emotionally stable and also able to be optimistic and thrive. When we take the physical angle, it also means that they're very driven to achieve their goals. So that's an overall holistic perspective when we look at well-being. Now burnout on the other hand is the complete polar opposite, where one is physically, mentally and emotionally exhausted to the point where they cannot go on with their day-to-day lives. So it affects their work and their home lives. Now burnout was initially coined from the healthcare industry when we look at service workers. But given that we live in such a volatile, uncertain, ambiguous and also ever-changing, complex world with technological changes as well, it's very hard for working professionals to keep up with these challenges, and it also means that there are constant demands on them. So constant demands for behavioral changes, emotional responses. So they're very psychologically affected by it, and it's about how you actually view burnout as well. So when I said it was a multidimensional phenomenon, we can look at it from a perspective of process and also the outcomes.
What are the primary causes and symptoms of burnout in professionals?
Okay, also a very good question, but I would like to add here that there is no one size response to symptoms and antecedents of burnout, because it's a very personal question. So look at it in terms of the individual. Each individual is, like I mentioned before, has a psychological, social and physical component to them. So what do I mean by this? When we take our physical health, we're looking at our brain structure, brain function, how we are born with certain genes, which predisposes an individual to react to external stimuli. So remember I mentioned to you about the constant changes that are going on. So depending on each individual's personality and what their genetic makeup is, how they would respond to an external pressure or perceived threat to their well-being would determine the extent of their levels of stress and also their levels of burnout. So when I mention stress, I would like to again explore with you or make you understand that stress is also how one perceives an imminent threat on their well-being. So if we go back to the hunter-gatherer times, we tend to have three responses ideally. when we are confronted with a threat to our lives, we either freeze, we try to flee away from the situation, or we try to fight. But our brain, although we right now have evolved to live in these ever-changing, fast-paced worlds, our brain has not evolved and is still the same. So even if we are looking at a laptop or a MacBook and doing work online, the same process goes on biologically in our brain, right? So there's no response in terms of fighting or fleeing. We are frozen. And now we have come to a stage in this working world that we call fawning, which is directly relevant to the workplace, because when one cannot do anything, if they feel helpless or hopeless, they tend to fawn, which means they have no option but to please or adjust to the situation that's ongoing. Now, this requires a lot of resources, mentally and physically and emotionally. So if they don't get the resources that they require, then they're going to have an issue because there's an imbalance. So you'll see lack of motivation, cognitive impairment, because over time, like I mentioned, burnout can be looked at as a process that is long term, and then it can also manifest in itself as symptoms. So you get people who are extremely stressed out over a long period of time, and so the responses or symptoms would be chronic. So you'll have musculoskeletal disorders, cognitive impairment, where you have confusion, tiredness, behavioral responses which are not very favorable. So you'll see levels of absenteeism, presenteeism. You're there but at work, but you're not really actively doing work. You'll find people saying they have gastrointestinal issues and they will go to the doctor. They'll get a host of tests done, but there'll be nothing. So this is your biological system playing up. Because what really happens is when we are stressed, there is a hormone. Again, we go back to the biological function of the body. That's when we are encountered with a perceived threat, that is released, a hormone that's released called cortisol. Now what cortisol does is it prepares the human body to fight, flee or freeze, right? So a constant release of cortisol is going to affect one's immune system, which is also a stress response. So briefly, the less cortisol you have in your system is better, because more cortisol would mean that you're more susceptible to illnesses. And slowly but surely, your body at a cellular level will start changing with more increased cortisol, and over time there'll be cellular damage. So you'll see forgetfulness, brain fog, other cognitive impairments, or the lack of cognitive capacity to work as maybe efficiently or effectively as one used to. So like I said, it prevails over time, which you come out to the last stage, which is emotional exhaustion, hence burnout, mentally, physically and emotionally.
So Iranjali, what are some evidence-based stress management techniques that these professionals can implement?
Okay, so remember I mentioned the importance of personalization. Now the reason I mentioned it is because each individual has different personalities. So when we say personality, I'd like to mention certain aspects. So each individual has universal traits, which is extroversion to introversion, agreeableness to non-agreeableness. These are all on scales. Neuroticism, which means how stable are you emotionally, openness? Are you open to challenges? Are you flexible? And all of these affect how one would encounter a challenge and how they would pursue with it. So when you mention what type of evidence-based therapies are there, I think the first line would be to see what their personality is. So if one would, let's say, is highly neurotic, that means that their levels of perception interfere with their ability to perform. So if one is highly neurotic, their levels of stress is likely to be higher. So based on each individual, the circumstance and what they're going through, it's very important to make sure that each therapeutic intervention is tailored and targeted to each individual's needs. So I would say in terms of first line of intervention would be talk therapy. That would help someone identify, okay, what is actually going on with the individual? Is it a common problem that's affecting everyone? If not, what's the context? The context is very important. Like I mentioned, it could be if you have 5 people in the room and you have an external stimuli that's pressuring them, all 5 people will react in 5 different ways. So that individual response is critical, and identifying why they respond the way they do, which includes their perceptions, their thought processes, how they think and feel, will ultimately affect how they cope, which is your secondary appraisal. So if one gets stressed out, what do? Do they seek therapy, or do they go and have a smoke or turn into drugs? So it doesn't have to be that extreme. I'm just trying to make it clear that it's a very personalized response, which means that it should be a personalized treatment. So I would say the first line of intervention would be to seek help and ideally talk therapy. Then it is important to address for how long this has been going on. If it's anxiety and stress related, mostly if it's more than 2 weeks, it's highly suggestible to get help. So seek a psychologist, a therapist, and also if it's burnout related. Like I mentioned, burnout doesn't happen overnight. It is a process. So you will have all of these symptoms by the time you get to that very bad state of emotional exhaustion and cognitive impairment. So it's also important to not wait that long, and that means seeking help in the form of therapy. So I would say cognitive behavioral therapy, again, is a very good therapeutic tool for stress, anxiety, and burnout. However, like I said, depending on the individual and their level of burnout, again, there may be other suggestions that we as mental health professionals can make, and this includes lifestyle changes, certain exercise interventions, and that's very important because again, when it comes to exercise, again, we're moving our body. So remember the chemical cortisol I told you about. Over time, it damages the cell, right? But exercise actually helps repair the cells because it releases, the body releases what we call BDNF, which is a growth hormone. So it helps repair the cells that are damaged and also pumps in those feel-good hormones, which are endorphins. So I would say, depending on the individual, it could be an exercise intervention, it could be mindfulness-based cognitive behavioral therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy, and also if it's chronic burnout, which we are talking about extreme exhaustion, fatigue that you see with lack of drive, cynicism, which is lack of faith and trust in employees, it's time to change your lifestyle. So when it's in extreme cases, we do encourage lifestyle changes because burnout recovery takes over a year to bring the body and mind into balance.
So how can managers foster a culture of resilience within their teams or organizations?
Yes, so I think the key here to this question is to foster a psychologically safe environment where people are open and feel safe enough to reach out for help. So again, remember that we do live in a society that has norms. So over time, these norms can be helpful, but it can also hinder our progress. So if we take Sri Lanka, for example, we do, and many South Asian or Asian countries, there is stigma surrounding seeking help for mental health. So I think it's time to break that stigma, because it's that stigma that prevents us from seeking help. And if managers are also not open to providing and fostering an environment where employees feel psychologically safe enough to reach out for help, then it's likely not going to happen. So I would say employers need to start from the top, to send a message out saying it's okay to not be okay, and to reach out for help just as they would if there were any other issues or other diseases that's going on. Because at the end of the day, people don't have issues with seeking help with regard to a heart problem, diabetes. So why is it, when it comes to mental health, related health, why is it so difficult for people to come out and say that they need help? So there is also this perception that, okay, maybe I look weak, but that's not the case. We are made to believe that that's the case, but again, that's not the case. So they don't want to reach out for help, thinking that their careers would be sabotaged and that they will be perceived negatively. But if their managers and their organizations are open and promote a sense of unity and openness and flexibility to have those services there so that their employees can reach out, which should be a common thing as offered with other health packages, I think employees will be more likely to reach out. And in fact, that is what we do. We provide employee assistance services to organizations where employees directly contact us when they feel stressed and when they feel that their job is challenging or there are other demands that maybe at home or their personal life that may be affecting their performance at work. So simple, I would say simple workplace changes and strategies like having an open culture, promoting psychological safety at work, and providing them with employee assistance programs would be a great start. Adding further, like I mentioned before, if it's very bad, there would be employees that need that added help, then it's about personalization. And if their load of work is very high, and if that's the case, it's time to re-strategize and optimize certain work related designs, and also help them with what we call buffering, so that they're psychologically flexible to get the help they need whilst working as well.
What strategies can professionals use to set boundaries and manage workload effectively?
Okay, so setting boundaries and managing workload effectively or efficiently would also depend on the industry the person works for. So I'm just going to give you a few examples. So if you're in the tech industry or the finance industry, most likely you'll be working to times that are not your usual 9-to-5 jobs because of the rapid changes that are taking place. So if you're working to US times or UK times, then managing, it's not about really managing your workload and setting boundaries, it's about, okay, is your personality and yourself, are you comfortable in doing this job? Because if not, then over time you will burn out, because at the end of the day, like I said, it's a phenomenon that happens over time. So okay, first few years or maybe even first few months you'll be okay, but eventually your body keeps a score, and even though you don't know it mindfully or you're not mindfully aware of it, your body does keep the score. So I think break down that question into which industry does one work in. Simply stated, usually people who apply to those industries have those knowledge and skill sets that are tailored to those industries. So I would say, if you're not a person that, because you can have all the knowledge and skills, but if you don't have the personality, I would say, and also the ability to, because at the end of the day it does affect our circadian rhythms and your body, your natural body timing. So if that's going to affect your health, then over time it will affect your mental health and your physical health, which leads to emotional burnout. So if we dig deeper and see if that's covered, right? Okay, then how open are you to adapting? So are you comfortable enough to tell your manager, look, I do have issues dealing with the timings. Is there an alternative solution to this? It's all about seeking different solutions, because sometimes it's not very straightforward, and if it is in the line of their work, then certain accommodations need to be made. So if it's shift work, okay, then we re-strategize and see how can we help the employees to take the necessary time off work that they need after a possibly long project or possibly long night shifts. So like I said, this could be in the healthcare industry, tech industry, but you often don't see an issue with this type of work if it's a 9-to-5 job. And then if we do take a 9-to-5 job, you do have environments where maybe managers do tend to micromanage, or there's a toxic work culture. Then it's about addressing the work culture and making it a good environment, or what we call a good climate to work in. So again, we promote certain priorities. So the management, together with the HR department and the heads of the company, they need to be able to set a code of conduct and promote well-being related strategies where employees again are comfortable to say no if it's too much for them, and also where it's open and safe enough culture where they are able to redesign their jobs in a way that they can keep working and also adjust to their priorities so that they get the work done, but also get the help or time off they need to retreat and come back. So this is actually a significant problem right now in the tech industry, finance industry. And what we do is we do provide, like I mentioned, employee assistance services, but we also provide what we call retreats. So it could be detox retreats where you have time off without the devices, or burnout prevention and management retreats where they're taught the necessary skills that are dire for self-management, self-care, and that should, I feel, be promoted from within the organization. So these types of strategies where an organization can encourage different lifestyle changes, maybe focus more on employee well-being as well when it comes to different issues like nutrition, because at the end of the day, the way we work, the way we work, the way our mind works, is affected by how we are nourished as well. So if we are malnourished, then we can't work. And if we don't work, then it's the company that loses hours lost due to absenteeism, presenteeism, and low productivity. So actually, when we take it from a holistic perspective, looking into those social, physiological, biological, mental aspects that can help an employee is not a cost, I would say. It's an investment, and the organization can actively participate in promoting well-being to support their employees. So I would say it's you start from within. How do we help employees adapt, shift their perception towards a healthy lifestyle, and also help them to be okay with getting the help they need to talk to mental health professionals, alternative and integrative health professionals, for example, even yoga. That will help them move their body, which will affect their mind and their overall health and well-being.
What are the support systems or resources that are available for individuals who are experiencing burnout?
Okay, so I would say, like I mentioned before, it's very important to look at the extent to which one is burned out. And this can be done by seeking a mental health professional. So I would say a professional who is specialized in burnout, that way they can test the levels of burnout. And this is important because the intervention would depend on your level of burnout. So a psychologist would be a great resource. You can also read up on simple things you can do, like avoiding screen time, because like I mentioned before, when you go on social media, for example, you constantly see other people doing certain things, and there's a bit of a facade there as to a life you want to live. This is very common now amongst children and even the young population. So it's kind of an approach where they're constantly seeking out for something that's not there or that's lacking in their life, which could also contribute to their levels of stress, anxiety, which will accelerate levels of burnout. So I would say it's time to go back to the roots, which I mentioned before. Detoxing is really important because that means there's no screen time, or you minimize the amount of screen time and you spend time in nature. This is why we do retreats in the first place, because it helps people ground themselves in nature and the present moment, here and now. So I would say when it comes to resources, your first line of help would be a therapist, a psychologist, any mental health professional. That said, the extent of burnout, so if you do, because burnout and depression, anxiety, stress, they all have comorbid symptoms, low mood, fatigue. So it's very important to seek psychiatric help as well, so that you're sure that there's nothing else going on. And it's not for labeling purposes, but it's to be aware, because we are consciously being mindful of our health as well. And that would kind of help us push out a potential issue that's not there if your mental health checkup comes clear. Then it's about seeking emotional adjustment. So speaking to your psychologist, finding ways to reduce the amount of screen time, and also setting yourself away from a life that's online, right? We want to come back to an offline, on-site, being mindful and present in the moment now. So remember I mentioned to you about phoning. So sometimes it's nice to see people, even on LinkedIn, put up their certificates. But we do see a trend where this upsets other people because they feel that they're not doing enough. So they do try to, it becomes a competition then, and it leads to a cycle of validation. And you find that even in other platforms, in social media platforms. Again, so you're looking at fawning, trying to please people, but in the end, does it really matter, right? It's coming at the cost of your mental health. So it's about understanding, okay, what are the limits? Where do we draw a boundary? And a professional will help you do that because they work with you. They know your life, they assess you as a person, your personalities, limitations, strengths, weaknesses. So it's very important to seek a health professional in order to set those boundaries, goals, and also to get the help they need. That is from an individual level. From an organizational level, you can always set up employee assistance programs, which by default has mental health professionals who employees can seek help from when they need, and that's done in a private, confidential, and non-judgmental manner. And if they have that resource to begin with, it wouldn't escalate and lead to burnout, which means they will get the prevention strategies they need before they come to that state. So I think that's a good start.
Thank you, Iranjali, for sharing those valuable insights with us.
You're most welcome, and thank you for having me.
I'm sure our audience has greatly benefited from the comprehensive review of how to avoid burnout.